Sometimes when a man pulls away, it's not because he's losing interest. It's because something much deeper is awakening within him, something he can't yet name or understand. What if his distance is not a rejection, but a sign that he's falling for you more than he knows how to handle? When a man begins to experience deep emotional connection, it often stirs something hidden beneath the surface, his shadow self. This shadow is not inherently negative. It consists of all the parts of him he has denied, rejected, or never fully understood. These can be emotions like vulnerability, fear of dependence, the need to be nurtured, or the fear of being seen as weak. The experience of falling for someone can act as a mirror, reflecting these buried aspects back to him. Suddenly he is not just dealing with external feelings, but with an internal confrontation. The person he's falling for becomes more than just someone he's attracted to. She becomes a symbolic figure, unconsciously representing something powerful. He may start to feel exposed, even if she hasn't done anything to cause it. Her presence, her kindness, her emotional depth may unknowingly press against the sealed doors of his psyche, unlocking memories or emotional responses he has never processed. For example, he might remember what it felt like to trust someone and then be hurt. Or he might feel overwhelmed by the idea that someone could truly love him for who he is, beyond the image he shows to the world. That confrontation with the shadow self can be deeply unsettling. At this point, many men instinctively retreat, not because they have lost interest, but because they are flooded with emotions they do not yet have the tools to navigate. They don't know how to explain what they're feeling, and often they are unaware that what they're experiencing isn't about the woman, it's about them. Their psyche is working through old narratives, hidden insecurities, and emotional wounds that they've learned to keep buried. His emotional distance then becomes a way of managing this internal overwhelm. It gives him space to subconsciously process what is happening. To feel love is to open up the self. And for someone who has carefully curated his image or tightly guarded his emotions, that openness can feel dangerous. Even if consciously he wants love, his unconscious may be pulling him away from it, fearing the vulnerability it demands. The shadow doesn't want to be exposed. It resists, it pulls back, and the deeper his feelings grow, the louder the shadow becomes. Ironically, the closer he gets to someone who evokes real emotional intimacy, the more the unresolved parts of himself come forward. That is why someone falling in love can seem to act in contradiction, becoming cold when things get warmer, distant. It isn't rejection. It's a psychological defense. Until he begins the internal work of integrating these shadow aspects, he may continue to oscillate between closeness and retreat. His behavior is not a reflection of the other person's worth, but of his own inner conflict. This process is silent, invisible, and deeply human. To witness a man pulling away is often to witness his first steps in confronting himself, even if he does not yet understand what is happening within. When a man begins to fall in love, one of the most common and least understood responses is emotional withdrawal. On the surface, it appears contradictory. Why would someone pull away from something they deeply desire? But within the human psyche, particularly in the masculine experience, love often triggers an inner conflict between the yearning for intimacy and the need for autonomy. This tension is rarely conscious. It plays out subtly through emotional distancing, reduced communication, or an unexplained sense of detachment. What's truly happening is that love has started to challenge his psychological boundaries. For many men, independence is not just a lifestyle, but an identity. From an early age, they may be conditioned to associate strength with self-reliance, control, and emotional restraint. When a deep emotional connection begins to form, it can feel like a threat to the very structure of that identity. Falling for someone implies surrender, not in the sense of giving up, but in yielding to emotional vulnerability, to interdependence, to the unknown. And that surrender can be interpreted by the psyche as a loss of personal freedom. The idea of becoming emotionally reliant on another, or even just deeply affected by them, might stir unconscious fears of entrapment, suffocation, or losing the ability to make autonomous choices. This reaction isn't rooted in a lack of love. It's rooted in fear. The ego, the part of the mind that maintains a sense of control and stability, often reacts defensively when something or someone begins to shift the balance. The ego views change, even positive change, as destabilizing. So even as a man feels himself growing closer to someone, another part of him may push back to preserve his sense of self. He may question his feelings, downplay their intensity, or instinctively create emotional space as a way to regain equilibrium. This distancing isn't necessarily a sign that the relationship is failing. It's often a sign that something real is happening, something deep enough to shake his foundation. Emotional closeness requires the ego to soften, to allow another person inside one's emotional world. For someone who has equated emotional containment with safety, this can feel like a psychological threat. The act of falling for someone becomes a symbolic death of total self-containment, and that can trigger resistance in the form of withdrawal. This is not calculated or manipulative. It is reflexive. He may not even understand why he's pulling away. He may only feel an inexplicable urge for space. He might frame it as needing time, feeling overwhelmed, or just not being ready, all of which reflect a deeper process at work. His distance, then, is not a denial of connection, but a temporary retreat to preserve what feels like threatened individuality. It's an internal negotiation between the old self, defined by independence, and the emerging self, capable of merging without losing identity. The more powerful the feelings, the more pronounced this retreat can become. It's a necessary psychological reckoning, where the fear of losing autonomy coexists with the longing for emotional union. When a man begins to fall for someone, he does not simply engage with the present moment. He also, often unconsciously, reactivates unresolved emotions from the past. This process is called emotional projection, where inner, often buried feelings are placed onto the current relationship. It is not deliberate or even fully conscious, but it deeply influences how he behaves. The woman he's falling for may unknowingly become a screen onto which he projects old fears, past disappointments, or unmet emotional needs. He may begin to see not who she truly is, but who he unconsciously fears or hopes she might be. For instance, if he was once hurt by someone he trusted deeply, be it a parent, a past partner, or even an early friendship, those unprocessed emotions may become awakened in the presence of new intimacy. The closer he feels to someone, the more exposed those inner wounds become. The new relationship feels emotionally familiar, and that familiarity can stir anxiety, even if the current connection is healthy. He may not be reacting to the actual dynamics between him and his partner, but to ghosts from his own psychological history. A simple moment of closeness might ignite an old fear of abandonment. A request for openness might trigger a defensive reaction born from a time he was punished for being vulnerable. This is how projection works. Instead of responding to what's truly in front of him, he responds to what his unconscious mind fears is in front of him. He begins to act distant, cold, or conflicted, not because the feelings aren't real, but because those feelings come with baggage he may not fully understand. In fact, the more intense the emotional connection, the stronger the projection can become. Love becomes a mirror, and in it he sees not only the possibility of connection, but also the danger of emotional repetition. This emotional confusion can cause withdrawal. He may pull away not because he wants to, but because his inner world feels unstable. He doesn't want to repeat the pain of the past, yet he hasn't yet separated past experiences from the current relationship. This can lead to contradictory behavior, affection one moment, detachment the next. The woman may feel like she's being punished for things she didn't do, as if she's being held responsible for invisible dynamics that predate her presence in his life. And in a way, she is, because projection blurs the line between past and present. Until he becomes aware of these projections, he may continue to act from a place of emotional distortion. He needs to recognize that not all closeness leads to betrayal, that not every open heart will hurt him, but this recognition takes time, self-awareness, and a willingness to distinguish the inner narrative from external reality. Falling in love often initiates this very process, not by causing new wounds, but by revealing old ones that now seek healing. His emotional distance is not a rejection of love. It is often the unconscious fear of repeating pain disguised as caution. When a man starts to feel something deep for someone, he may unconsciously begin to test the emotional ground beneath him. This is not a conscious strategy, but a psychological defense rooted in vulnerability. Emotional intimacy awakens a part of him that wants to be seen and loved, but alongside that desire often comes fear of being judged, rejected, or misunderstood. Instead of speaking these fears aloud, he may withdraw, act indifferent, or behave in ways that appear inconsistent. These behaviors are not always meant to hurt or confuse. Rather, they act as silent tests to answer unspoken questions. Will she still care if I pull back? Will she chase me? Will she leave if I stop showing interest? Will she love me even when I'm not performing emotional closeness? This kind of unconscious testing is not manipulative in intent. It's a product of emotional uncertainty, a way to protect the fragile parts of the self that haven't fully matured or healed. A man who has been hurt before or who has learned to suppress emotional needs might not know how to directly express vulnerability. Instead, he creates distance as a way to see what remains. If he starts to feel a strong connection, he may instinctively pull away just to observe what happens. In his mind, love that can endure the silence or survive his withdrawal may feel more real, more trustworthy. If the person stays, doesn't pressure him, doesn't demand constant affirmation, it signals emotional safety. It shows that love isn't conditional or performative. The paradox is that this withdrawal may hurt or confuse the very person he's trying to test. She may interpret his distance as a sign of disinterest or fading affection, not realizing that it stems from a deeper need to feel secure without having to explain or justify his emotions. Many men have never learned how to express the need to be loved without appearing needy, so instead they create space and wait to see if love will fill it, without being asked. This waiting is a form of emotional assessment. It's an unconscious way to answer the question, can I be myself and still be loved? Through this testing, he may also be evaluating the emotional climate of the relationship. Can it withstand conflict, distance, and silence? Is it fragile or durable? If a man has spent much of his life associating love with performance, with having to constantly give, please, or prove, then true emotional safety can feel unfamiliar. Testing is a way to confirm whether love exists, even in stillness and absence, but these behaviors can be easily misunderstood by someone unaware of their emotional root. It takes a great deal of self-awareness to recognize that distance doesn't always mean detachment. Sometimes it's a quiet plea for reassurance, not through words or effort, but through patience, presence, and calm endurance. The man is not testing her love to manipulate. It is often the only way he knows how to measure emotional truth without asking to be reassured directly. When a man begins to fall deeply for someone, he often experiences an unconscious awakening of his inner feminine, a psychological archetype representing emotion, intuition, creativity, and relational depth. This archetype, long buried beneath the structures of reason, control, and external identity, begins to rise to the surface through the emotional intimacy he feels with the woman he's drawn to. It is not a conscious realization. Rather, it unfolds subtly, often without his understanding. This inner feminine, known in depth psychology as the anima, has been developing in the background of his life, through every emotional experience he's had, every image of love, every interaction with nurturing or rejecting figures. When he falls in love, especially with someone who mirrors or activates these deeper elements, this archetype begins to stir. This inner activation brings both fascination and discomfort. On one hand, he feels more alive, more connected, more human, but on the other hand, he feels emotionally exposed, disoriented by a side of himself he has either rejected or never truly understood. The woman becomes a symbolic figure, a mirror of the anima, not just someone he is falling for, but someone through whom he encounters a forgotten part of himself. The emotions that arise are not always simple affection or joy. They may also include fear, confusion, longing, or even resentment. These conflicting responses can overwhelm him, causing him to step back, not from lack of interest, but from a psychic storm that he cannot yet name. As this inner feminine begins to emerge, it may clash with the masculine ideals he's internalized. Narcissism, emotional self-sufficiency, control. He may feel as though his world is being restructured from within. The balance he's used to maintaining begins to shift. The emotional vulnerability required to truly fall in love pushes against his internal resistance. The closer he gets to someone, the more these inner tensions surface. The warmth and emotional openness of his partner become the very qualities that both draw him in and frighten him, because they reflect the aspects of himself he has not yet accepted or developed. This inner conflict can cause him to act distant, aloof, or inconsistent. He may be struggling not with her, but with himself. What looks like coldness is often an inner battle between who he thought he was and who he is becoming. He may feel emotionally unprepared to integrate these deeper feelings. The woman, from his unconscious perspective, is not just a romantic figure, but also the trigger for this internal transformation. And transformation is rarely comfortable. His retreat is often not a rejection of love, but a moment of retreat into the familiar, where he can temporarily escape the intensity of change. The relationship is no longer just about two people. It becomes a psychological journey where he is asked, without realizing it, to become whole by reconciling with the emotional dimensions of his own being, awakened through love. When a man begins to fall in love, the feelings that arise can conflict with the mental image he holds of how love should unfold. He may have unknowingly built that image over years, shaped by early experiences, cultural expectations, past relationships, and personal fears. This ideal is often structured, controlled, and based on assumptions about timing, readiness, or the kind of person he should love. Yet love, in its raw and unexpected form, often appears outside those mental constructs. The woman he's falling for may not fit the script he envisioned, or the speed and intensity of his emotions may not align with the emotional pacing he believed was right. When this happens, the mind struggles to integrate the experience, and in that inner struggle, distance arises. He may not even realize what he's doing. His withdrawal isn't an intentional strategy, but a psychological recalibration. His inner world is being challenged by something that doesn't fit its previous framework. If he imagined love as something gradual, safe, and entirely within his control, falling quickly and deeply can feel like losing grip. If he believed he'd only connect with someone who checked all his logical boxes, but instead feels pulled to someone who simply makes him feel alive, it disrupts his certainty. This disruption causes confusion, not because something is wrong, but because something real is breaking through the surface. Love begins to feel less like a plan and more like a force. It disrupts, rearranges, and calls into question what he thought he understood. This disorientation can make him retreat. He may begin to question the relationship, not because it lacks value, but because it is challenging his narrative. He might tell himself he's unsure, that it's moving too fast, or that something feels off, even when nothing external has changed. What he's really feeling is the discomfort of having to let go of mental control. Real love doesn't always feel the way the mind expects. It can feel wild, chaotic, even frightening, especially to someone who has found safety in structure and predictability. And when that safety is threatened, not by harm but by unpredictability, the instinct is often to step back. This response is more psychological than emotional. He may still feel deeply, but his mind is trying to protect him from perceived risk. The idea of surrendering to something unknown, something not governed by logic or plan, can feel too vulnerable. So he creates emotional space, hoping it will restore the order he once had. But what's truly happening is a moment of inner conflict. His heart moves toward connection, while his mind pulls him toward certainty. The emotional distance is not necessarily about doubt in the relationship. It's about resistance to internal change. Love, when it is real, forces us to rewrite our stories, to dismantle the rigid mental structures we use to shield ourselves. And in that rewriting, the man may disappear momentarily, not to escape love, but to find a version of himself capable of receiving it. What appears as emotional distance may in fact be the soul's quiet struggle with transformation. Love, when real, doesn't simply bring joy, it brings disruption, it stirs the unconscious, and it awakens forgotten parts of the self. A man who pulls away in the presence of deep connection is not always confused about you. He may be confronting the mirror you hold up to him, revealing his hidden fears, unresolved wounds, and long-buried truths. His silence may be the sound of his inner world rearranging. If you feel his withdrawal during what seemed like the beginning of something meaningful, understand. You may not be losing him. You may be watching him meet the part of himself that love has just uncovered.